Hey, welcome back to Evil's Comics. I'm Evil Mike, and this is going to be my overview. Night Terrors Week 4. We got another slew of books to go over. So before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe on this guy's channel. It does help. All the likes, comments, it's all free. Doesn't cost you anything. It's just interaction between me and you, and that's what I'm here for, is the interaction. Hit the bell. You never know when I'm gonna drop videos. I mean, it's a simple click, you know. Alright, so got all that out of the way. So we got Night Terrors Week 4, and officially this is the Night Terrors Book 2 out of the series, but this is Week 4. And I'm gonna tell you, this issue, it was dope. This whole week, I want to say there was a couple like, but for overall, everything was pretty good. So we start out, and it's kind of like a catch-up. You know, we're Boston brand, and you know, if you have not kept up with the series, I have reviewed, you know, every week, minus a couple issues from the first week. But there's also other people that are doing deep dives on this, like the Sector, Paul, 2815, him and Legion are doing a deep dive. So I highly suggest you keeping up with the story if you're hopping on right now. So we are with Deadman, who is currently in Batman, and he just resurrected the Sandman. The Sandman has been dead. He had some Lazarus stuff, and bam, we got the Sandman, the detective, back, and that's kind of what this is. He has ties to this Nightmare Stone, and in this issue we kind of find out a little more. He tells the story about, you know, that he did have a run with the Nightmare Stone in the past. It had dealings with this cult. At first he thought it was like a sex and money type of thing, but sure enough, things went bad. He quickly found out that this cult was a different type of cult. They were willing to like sacrifice themselves to bring this Nightmare Stone into reality, which they did do. The Sandman was able to like stop the, you know, the whole ordeal, and the Nightmare Stone kind of like slipped back out of reality before it kind of like fully entered, kind of thing, and it just kind of disappeared. At that point, the detective side with Batman and Sandman, they're pretty much like, hey, you know, let's go see if there's any known relatives living from that cult, kind of thing. And that's where the book jumps to. We get this guy sleeping, and he starts having a nightmare. Of course, you know, the whole world's asleep at this time, but he literally is dreaming about, you know, younger times when he had the stone, and basically what he was doing with the stone, kind of thing. And it was more wealth and this and that. During this dream, Insomniac shows up, and he's basically trying to find the stone, finding out this guy doesn't know where it is, kind of thing. He gives him exactly what he wanted, and he does it in the cruelest fashion ever, but he just fills his insides with like gold, so much to the point that it's bursting out of this guy, and eventually it looks like this guy dies in the real world as well, but this guy's like split in half by money. Right before we went to this little sequence, we got a call from, I think it's called Terrific. That's Mr. Terrific's like base, and it said like a call from Red Tornado. Of course, being a robot, he's not asleep. And Deadman and Batman, that's where they headed to, you know, once they but basically they get there and they find out that Mr. Terrific is in like a nightmare stasis, but he's being held in like this monitoring cell, and they're like, Red Tornadoes informs both Batman and Deadman that that things are getting worse, that he's not just having a nightmare, that he is slipping into a coma. So basically they do have a timetable now that is activated. At this time, Deadman before had already connected with Insomnia. He had already went into his body and kind of got some of his memories. It was basically all his nightmares. All his real memories were hidden. They are connecting again all of a sudden, and we get this this scene. I think it's at Arkham Towers or something like that, and it's right before you know, the the Lazarus Rain hit or whatever, and they're talking about Dark Crisis and how the heroes were supposed to be dead, and then all of a sudden, like, you know, they arrived back on the scene, This kind of sent Insomnia into a frenzy, and he started killing people in the asylum. Eventually, they literally had to, put him into an induced coma, and that's kind of like, why he was asleep, and how he was during the Lazarus Reigns, how he was granted those powers. At this time, Sandman starts questioning Deadman. He's like, well, if you can see, his side, can he see your side? And as soon as he says that, that's where the book gets dope, because all of a sudden, the lights go out. It's nothing but silhouettes. It's Batman and Deadman in there with, the Sleepless Nights, yeah. And, they're basically moving around in the shadows and stuff. Red Tornado's supposed to be there. He's talking to them at one point. And basically, you can kind of see him right here at the bottom corner panel. And we quickly find out that he's already been killed, like the second the lights went out, and this is where the book leaves off. But you talk about, like, just going through those panels and setting it up like a horror book. Man, those last couple pages did it for me. It was fantastic, but that's where this issue leaves off. So I'm going to quickly run through some of these other ones. We got Action Comics, and honestly, the beginning part of the story was it's one of the more mad ones. It's about Powergirl, and it's going back to her, and at this point, she's already in the nightmare, but basically she's back on Krypton, she's dealing with her parents, and it's like her whole story is flipped upside down. Her dad's trying to kill her, and blah, 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 but basically it's Insomnia messing with her, and she's not, in her nightmare, she's one of the people that's not really figuring out that it's a nightmare. She's kind of going with it, but at the same time, she's not realizing that it's a nightmare kind of thing. Eventually it breaks out into where she does start kind of piecing some things together, but not really in the nightmare form, but more along the lines as she starts figuring out that it's not real, but because certain things start happening, like her dad all of a sudden flips over and turns into Superman, but her nightmare starts setting up more to resemble a game. Like as soon as she gets so far, it switches and she goes to another level. Hence right here, and she ends up having this conversation with Superman about, why'd you hit me? I know I'm kind of boring, blah, blah, but then he walks up and he just presses a button right above the cleavage, and she turns off. He ends up taking her away and being thrown into this junk pile, and we get these images over here, and it's some dystopian trash kind of like she was just thrown away as far as a robot or whatever. So then we get this whole image, and it's it's restarting. Now it might be set up both ways. It could be a video game, or it could be where she's an android, hence the garbage pile or whatever. But eventually, we get to the scenario, and it's kind of the same thing. She's thrown into this theater setting, and she kind of goes along with it for a little bit, where she's actually reciting lines, and then all of a sudden things starts changing as soon as she gets so far. She gets reset again, I guess, we'll say. But it's kind of they keep showing us images like this, she is an android or something, and then basically she's defying her logic or something, and that's why she's getting restarted, the program's restarting. We get this scene right here, which I thought was dope, and I'm drawing a blank at her name, but they get into this kind of spat back and forth. The cat kind of jumps out of nowhere and ends up just decimating that girl. You can see right here, and it kind of throws this page off. We get a little more of the creepiness that comes from that, because it looked like she had died, but then she reanimates. But it only goes so far, and she kind of restarts at the very end. We see her being restarted again, program restart. Okay, so this is really the book that, the story that I want to talk to. It's also written by Phillip Kennedy Johnson. Well, we basically got the super family, and this whole story was so dope. It's basically, Hank Henshaw, hence the cover, and it's Cyborg Superman coming back from being stuck in the Phantom Zone. And you talk about this quickly getting into a horror read, because eventually the Wonder Twins, there's a whole bunch of conversation. It's just a family night at the, they're watching a movie or whatever, and eventually, Hank Henshaw starts coming up about how he was scary, but yet he's stuck in the Phantom Zone. He can't come back, but yet he recently did. And that's kind of what everybody starts thinking about. We get images of them, dreaming, and of course they're all asleep right now. They are in the nightmare, but they just don't realize it. Eventually they get to the scene where it looks like Calyx takes over like Connor, and you kind of see this image over here of him being abducted and like being taken over by Calyx, because Calyx has the cyborg Superman thing in him, and eventually we get this with Superboy mixed with cyborg Superman, and eventually he's like hunting the family. Eventually, like, it gets to where they start noticing stuff that is not normal, kind of thing. Eventually they all start fighting this version of Superboy. He does this whole like coming out of the TV thing, which was so dope. But eventually, like, they all try to fight him. Eventually, they do get like one-sided, especially I think it's Natasha Steele's daughter, but it's because he, like, you can see he activates her armor and she starts having to fight her own armor. But at the very end, it's just like he is like merging everybody together. Like, now it's like, Connor and Natasha, and then we have like Crypto at the end, and this was fantastic. I can't wait for part 2 on that one, but that's where that one leaves off. Okay, Titans, I'm going to briefly run through, and there's a mystery in the beginning of this one. It starts off with this one character, and through this whole read, I have no idea who this was. At first I thought it was Donna, and then I thought it was Raven. It is neither. So if you knew who this was, please let me know. But basically, she wakes up in this house of horrors, let's just say, and she's basically running through and activating all the different Titans that are asleep. We first come across Cyborg, and he's stuck in this like kind of pyramid thing. And I'm not going to go too much into detail, but basically she just wakes them up, and then they go back to like regular form kind of thing. And she just runs through the whole Titan house. We got Donna Troy next, Donna Troy being one of the cooler ones. Then we got Starfire, which Starfire goes by really, really quick. I think it's only a couple panels. Then we got Beast Boy. Beast Boy is actually a couple pages long. Then we got Raven after that. Eventually, once we get to Raven, that's pretty much the end of the book, and they head outside of this like mansion of horrors to turn around and find out that it's the weird T-Titan Academy or whatever. It's like on fire but growing. I don't know, but that's the end of this one. There wasn't a lot into it, honestly. Alright, so the last 3 are kind of the major ones from the series, let alone the first one. But we got Detective Comics, and Detective Comics pretty much follows James Gordon and Sorrow. A lot of people probably are familiar with Sorrow because he's in the background. He's been with James Gordon for like a year and a half now, something like that. But this book starts out great. It's touching base on how, James, failed as a cop, as a detective, as a father, kind of thing with James Jr. And basically, like, the nightmare happens, and we get this, Sorrow starts seeing certain things, and he starts noticing that insomnia is messing with the world. It's not explained how he knows this, but he kind of starts telling Jim. Eventually, Sorrow ends up taking off, and James proceeds to follow him. Now, if you don't know Sorrow, he does have powers. They're not really talked about, but he is able to see like some metaphysical or interdimensional type stuff. I don't know. Eventually, we come to this like tower, and these 3 people that are wearing these masks. They're supposed to be real people, although they are hidden. I want to say it could be like Bruce, Amanda Waller, and somebody else. I don't know. But eventually, they start talking to these nightmare type figures, asking them for like basic 3 things, like information, power, and knowledge. And like at first they're laughed at kind of thing, and eventually it's given to them. And once it's given to them, they basically they all kind of change. At this time, one of them turns into this crazy looking version of Batman, and this crazy version of Batman just basically starts killing people, including Sorrow. Sorrow is like the first one that gets decimated by this like futuristic looking nightmarish Batman kind of thing. Eventually Jim like he does follow this thing, and he's trying to like stop this thing. While this is going on, he starts realizing he is literally like cracking like glass. It is a repetitive thing. You'll see right here, there's one point where he tries to stop a situation and he can't. But basically, like, you know, this nightmare Batman is just running through, and he's not killing everybody. He's doing the same thing that Batman does, but this time he's killing. You know, he's killing thugs and gangsters and stuff like that. Eventually, like, you know, Gordon gets to the point where his stuff is like falling off. He's missing like fingers and a leg, kind of thing. Eventually he is led onto this mystery, trying to figure out what's going on, but he goes back to this Angela character. Once he gets there, he finds out that like she was one of the people that asked for the wealth thing, because she is just constantly spitting out these diamonds. Let's see, and they show some crazy stuff, but that's I want to say that's kind of where this issue leaves off. More Jim breaking off, but basically these entities that showed up giving these people these powers, basically state that they, you know, that they're not worthy of the powers, kind of thing. One of my favorite issues from this series is Harley Quinn. Man, this was a fantastic issue. Not only did it take it focused on both her main series and the other series that she's been doing, the Harley Quinn, you know, screws up the DCU. But technically, we start out and Harley Quinn is going through like her own nightmare. It's like she kind of starts with it, and as she goes through, she realizes that like it is a nightmare. She kind of goes, that's one of my favorite things about Harley Quinn. She asks for the nightmare to like go at its craziest, which it does. Eventually we get to this thing where she's like, okay, this is boring, I've done this before. They try throwing all this stuff at Harley Quinn, but eventually she kind of tells the nightmare that you can't mess with her crazy because she lives in it, like, you know. And we see this thing called the debug room. It's told that she has like beat the game, that she has been gifted like all unlimited access or whatever, and they basically give her this, the Multiverse Guidebook, which is a real comic in the real world, and they basically explain that she has the keys to the multiverse. They also touch base on what she's been doing in her regular comic, because she has been flipping through the multiverses in that one, and the Harley Quinn screws up the DCU, her flipping through multiverses. Basically, at this point, the game, which it's, you know, kind of says that it is, kind of tells her to just pick an adventure, and which she does. She kind of like, she goes to Earth 31, which is the pirate world. She ends up dying in that world, and basically she gets taken back to the debug world. Once she gets there, she picks another adventure, and it's the vampire world. It is Earth 43. At that point, she kind of makes a mistake where she ends up saving the Justice League, the vampiric Justice League, and the game tells her that she like has been added, and, you know, that she's so important and she's been added to every single Justice League there is, like, you know, and now she's a major part of the Justice League. And that's kind of where that issue leaves off, but there is a little side story in the back. And it's basically like an older Harley Quinn from the future and interviewing this new Harley and telling her that she needs to come with her to save the world. In a nutshell, that's basically what it is, and it goes around in a big circle. I'm just kind of spanning over that, but that's kind of what this is. It ends off like right where we start at the very beginning of the interview, and that's kind of all we get in this one. But this was a fantastic issue. Last but not least is going to be AngelBreaker, a character that I did not know existed until this thing, but supposedly she came around Batman 122 or something like that from the Shadow War series. But we're going to run through this, and it's basically like AngelBreaker. She ends up recruiting this dude named Raptor, another guy I'm not familiar with that was during that series right here. Basically telling him that she needs to infiltrate this Cobra, you know, cult headquarters thing, and they need to find this like this stone that's there or something like that. They eventually like fly out to this location that's supposedly in Ohio. There's a lot of like back and forth conversation because both these characters know each other. But we eventually get to this like compound, and we find out it's more like a school. It's run by this headmistress. There are like students that go there, but it is a cult, and they're set up like towards that cult thing. Eventually, we get the whole like where they do the infiltration thing. They eventually get there, and as soon as they get there, they have to actually make it to the compound, but they get there pretty easily. We find out her weapon is kind of like whatever you throw at her, she just throws back with immense force. We do get to see what the stone is. It's like the snake-looking stone or whatever, but it has the ability to look into people's nightmares, hence it tying into the nightmare stone. As soon as they get there into the compound, they are greeted with the children, which they find kind of weird. But as soon as that happens, that's when the whole nightmare, everybody falls asleep. As soon as that happens, that's where this kind of gets weird. Yeah, I don't really know if all this is happening or not, but the book kind of plays out like the nightmare thing never happened, and it just keeps going forward. We find out that this kid is a spy that's been like working for the League of Assassins to infiltrate this Cobra thing. Eventually, we see that this lady was going to abuse this stone or whatever, and as this is going, we see this like creepy like lady that's hidden in shadows that eventually creeps up and kills the headmaster out of nowhere, and we kind of find out why at the end of the book, because eventually our AngelBreaker lady eventually sees that character behind one of the kids. It's not mentioned at first, but it freaks the hell out of AngelBreaker. And that's kind of where we find out what her nightmare is. And basically, she spent a little time training with Zealot from Wildcats, and Dakota had this belief that there was this old lady that like was murdered by this husband that used to be a babysitter or something like that, and now she like chills. She's like the Baba Yaga. She shows up and she kills children, and she does it with this death rattle. She said when she went to sleep, basically the nightmare realm stole that thing out of her nightmares, and now it's after her kind of thing, and that's where this book leaves off. But that is all these books from Night Terrors week 4. It was a massive week. Each week is, but it's fantastic. Each one of these was really good. I can say the Powergirl one was my like least favorite, but it was still a great read. But the last 3, specifically the Harley, the Batman, the Harley was fantastic. It was probably my read of the week. But that is my review of the Night Terrors week 4. I will be doing 5, 6, all the other ones. I just got to get there. Let me know down below if you read any of these, which were your favorite. I don't know. That's all I got for you.